So let's start by reading once again from verse 30 to the end of the chapter. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and scourging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, ill treated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering over deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though well attested by their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had foreseen something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. So then we go to the
32.
the judges. So in each case, the person he named battled against overwhelming odds. Their defeat was assured, and yet only through faith in God could their struggle be undertaken, much less victory be won. Does everyone know about Gideon?
Only had 300 men.
Yeah, let's read it.
Yeah, okay.
It's Judges chapter 6. The Hebrews are being oppressed by the Midianites, and it starts with the call of Gideon in chapter 6, verse 11. Well, Gideon is not exactly a likely candidate to do much of anything. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the ark at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this befallen us? And where are all his wonderful deeds which our fathers recounted to us, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." And the Lord, so notice again, it's the least of the sons. And the Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." And he said to him, "If now I have found favor with you, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Do not depart from here, I beg you, until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay until you return." Then jump to chapter 7. Verse 1. Then, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand has delivered me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. And Gideon tested them. 22,000 returned, and 10,000 remained. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And he of whom I say to you, this man shall go with you, shall go with you. And any of whom I say to you, this man shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, every one that laps the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, every one that kneels down to drink. And the number of those that lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men. The rest of the people knelt down to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will deliver you and give them the Midianites into your hand, and let all the others go, every man to his home. So he took the jars of the people from their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, but retained the 300 men. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. And then what follows is the defeat of the Midianites. So a large army, well equipped of the Midianites, is defeated by only 300 men. Then jumping backward, we have Barak, who was summoned by the prophetess Deborah to lead the battle against the Canaanites, who were superior in numbers and technology. This is Judges chapter 4, verses 6 through 24. We can start at verse 4. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kedesh and Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kedesh, and Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kedesh. And 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with them. Jumping to 12, when Sisera was told that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out to all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him, from Harosheth Haggoim to the river Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak at the edge of the sword. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. And we can stop there. Then we have Samson, who defeated the Philistines. He lost his strength and was renewed for one final battle. I think it's in Judges chapter 15. Finally, we have Jephthah, which is in Judges chapter 11, which is interesting because of his vow. So Jephthah vows that if the Lord delivers him from the Ammonites, that he'll sacrifice the first person to meet him coming out of the doors of his house. And the first person coming out of the doors of his house is his daughter after he achieves victory over the Ammonites. And so he sacrifices her to fulfill his vow to the Lord. So a rather interesting example of faith.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, the faith of Barak is somewhat marred by the fact that he requires Deborah's presence. The word of God is not enough. And Jephthah vows an unnecessary sacrifice, which turns out to be the sacrifice of his daughter, sort of just to make sure that God will keep his promises. So why might he have selected those? In some ways, you can argue that although they ended up coming out on top, they also displayed weaknesses in faith.
Mm.
Jephthah with his vow and Samuel with the promise of what has to be a human sacrifice, unless it's the dog who comes out to meet him first, but that doesn't seem to have been the case.
Well, you don't go back on a vow.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of did it blindly, not probably thinking ahead, but wanted the victory.
But yeah, ordinarily, if you're going to sacrifice, you do it beforehand, not afterwards. And
Yeah.
and part of the whole point of the sacrifice of Isaac was that God doesn't accept human sacrifice, and then, of course, the human sacrifice is condemned in the case of the inhabitants of the promised land.
Mhm.
So much of his audience, so in some ways they had faith, but they had somewhat weak faith. That's very much like his audience. They
Mhm.
have faith, but but the question is, do they have strong enough faith? So they have strong enough faith to be Jews. Do they have strong enough faith to be Jewish Christians? Do they have strong enough faith to believe that Christ is the Messiah? Or are they, kind of reverting to what they see as being safe faith?
Yeah. So be safe without any sacrifices of their own.
What?
So it'd be safe faith in that they, didn't want to have to sacrifice.
Um,
You're giving all the examples of people who did.
Yeah,
So the people, the Hebrews at the time,
so
you know,
the things being sacrificed then were animals,
right.
and that's safer than oneself. I saw all of these heroes are people who took a risk and who risked defeat and death, but had to trust in God. And then the list concludes with David, Samuel, and the prophets. So in the case of David, the faith is, multiple and repeated. Faith is frequently exercised or tested and repeated. So David, besides the confrontation with Goliath, which was an enormous act of faith, was constantly then pursued by Saul, uh, by his younger son. And so he was constantly being tested, and his faith was tested as he was persecuted and pursued, and attempts were made to kill him, and then he had to sort of prove his valor in warfare. So that was really a constant with David. And then we have Samuel and the prophets. And so here he introduces the prophets without any specific references other than to Samuel. Samuel is noted for his intercession that ends the threat of the Philistines. Let's take a look at that. Samuel is the prophet, if everyone remembers, who anointed both Saul and then David. So 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 5 through 14. And Samuel said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the sons of Israel at Mizpah. Now, when the Philistines heard that the sons of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the sons of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the sons of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." So Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were routed before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as Bethkar. So Samuel's intercession. Then we have the triumphs of faith, who through faith conquered kingdoms, verse 33, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. And so the first three of those, conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, are sort of inspired by Gideon, Barak, and Samson, and Jephthah. Enforced justice refers to administering just government or just judgment, which was the responsibility of the judges, but also really points a to Samuel's farewell address, which is in 2 Samuel chapter 8. I'm sorry, 1 Samuel chapter 12. He says in verse 1, and Samuel said to all Israel, behold, I have listened to your voice and all that you have said to me and have made a king over you. Now behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray. And behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth until this day. Here I am. Testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? Testify against me, and I will restore it to you. They said, you have not defrauded us or oppressed us or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. And they said, he is witness. So one who judges and acts appropriately. Then he says, the author of Hebrews, receive promises. So what are the promises they received?
Well, Elijah promised the widow Zarephath when, he asked, didn't he ask for water first and then ask for food and have a jar filled?
Yeah,
The
we'll read that.
Yeah.
That's jumping ahead a little bit, though.
Oh,
I mean, the important point about receive promises is it's not receive the promise. These are the individual promises that were received.
right.
So the individual promises point forward to, so God makes individual promises, but those all point forward to the promise through Christ. So these are simply individual promises. And so that applies to basically everybody who has been mentioned up to this point, as well as those who came out victorious after this point. But for the listener of the letter, they'll be going backward. So, so for example, Gideon is promised deliverance from the Midianites, Barak, the defeat of Sisera, Samson of the Philistines, David of Saul, of Goliath, of um, all of his enemies. Then we have stop the mouths of lions. What is that? What does that refer to? It's Daniel in the lion's den. So there's an irrevocable decree that anyone who petitions a god, but not the king, has to be delivered to the den of lions. And so Daniel is caught, and much to because it's irrevocable, because the king had made it irrevocable, much to his chagrin, he's forced to send Daniel to the lion's den, even though he would rather not. And so then in verse 19 of chapter 6 of Daniel, then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. When he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you have served continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den. No kind of hurt was found upon him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had accused Daniel were brought down and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. The phrase "stop the mouths of lions" actually is found in a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures by a man named Theodotion. And the author of Hebrews uses that directly, the Theodotion version of the Old Testament. What about quenched fire? What does that refer to? It's also from Daniel. It's when Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, or their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are put in the furnace. Let's look at that. So that's chapter 3 of Daniel. And so Nebuchadnezzar makes a golden idol, and at an appointed time, everybody is supposed to bow down to it. Only Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael don't, which is kind of seems to be a no-no.
Mhm.
And so they're to be burned. So that's chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar uh, warns them to bow down. This is chapter 3, verse 15. Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyra, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image which I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, so they know God can deliver them. They don't know whether he will. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was accustomed to be heated. And he ordered certain mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their mantles, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were cast into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was strict and the furnace was very hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then we have a prayer of Azariah, which we can skip and go to, especially since it's enumerated differently. It's long and enumerated differently. And jump to verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He said to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He answered, "But I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come forth and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and we can stop there. So that's the quench the raging fire. So then again, notice that they didn't know whether God was going to save them or not, but it didn't matter to them because they weren't going to worship an idol. Escape the edge of the sword is numerous, including Elijah, including Elisha, including David, including Jeremiah, including the Jews, all Jews under Artaxerxes, and also including the people of Jerusalem during the Babylonian conquest under Sennacherib. One strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. There again, that describes a huge number of heroes of faith. Then women received their dead by resurrection. So who received their dead by resurrection?
Son who was the child of the widow of Zarephath.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah stretched himself over the dead boy.
Mm-hmm. And the Shunamite widow,
Yeah,
with
by
son
Elisha.
Elijah.
Yeah.
Are we all familiar with both of those? The widow of Zarephath is especially revealing because of her hospitality, which translates as faith, followed by her lack of faith. But nevertheless, the initial hospitality and faith were strong enough for God to act. So that's 1 Kings chapter 17. And so there's a severe drought. And so in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 8, the word of the Lord came to him being Elijah. "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there." So notice this is Gentile territory. This is Tyre and Sidon. So this woman is probably a Gentile. "Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you." So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, "Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink." And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." And she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a jar and a little oil in a pitcher. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. It's all that they have. So they're going to have their last meal before they starve to death. And Elijah said to her, "Fear not, go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make for yourself and your son." So that's totally nonsensical. Basically, you're supposed to get everything and eat it, leaving nothing. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of meal shall not be spent, and the pitcher of oil shall not fail, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of meal was not spent, neither did the pitcher of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Elijah. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my son to remembrance and to cause the death of my son?" And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her bosom and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's soul come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." So faith followed by accusation, but nevertheless, that accusation was not sufficient to overcome, to cancel out the initial faith that led her to feed Elijah, even though, I mean, it really was totally nonsensical. She was giving him basically all that she had to eat so that if nothing happened, she wouldn't even enjoy that final last meal, would starve. Then we see assurance of faith and victory uh, from the Shunamite woman. Um, that's in 2 Kings, starting in chapter 4, verse 8. One day Elisha went on to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small roof chamber with walls, and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." And jump to verse 18. So they had a son, a Shunamite woman and her husband. Verse 18, when the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. And he said to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." Father said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." And when he had lifted him and brought him to his mother, The child sat on her lap till noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. So notice immediate decisive action, and shut the door upon him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." And he said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." She said, "It will be well." Then she saddled the donkey, and she said to her servant, "Urge the beast on. Do not slacken the pace for me unless I tell you." So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, yonder is the Shunamite. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?'" And she answered, "It is well." And notice, it is well. Her son is dead, but it nevertheless is well because she sees beyond the death of her son. And when she came to the mountain to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came to thrust her away. But the man of God said, "Let her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" He said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not salute him. And if anyone salutes you, do not reply. And lay my staff upon the face of the child." Then the mother of the child said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So he arose and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff upon the face of the child. There was no sound or sign of life. Therefore he returned to meet him and told him, "The child is not awake." When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and shut the door upon the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he went up and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And as he stretched himself upon him, the flesh of the child became warm. Then he got up again and walked once back and forth in the house, and went up and stretched himself upon him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And we can stop there. And then in the next verse, in the next sentence, actually, in verse 35, some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise again to a better life. Another translation is that they might rise again to a better resurrection. So we have resurrection in the first sentence of verse 35 and a better resurrection in the second sentence of verse 35. What's the difference between them? What's better about it?
Well, the better resurrection is sharing in God's life, whereas the other is kind of just a deferral of death.
Right. Yeah.
Pardon me. I'm sorry.
The sons of the widow of Zarephath and the Shunamite woman are raised from the dead, so they're resurrected, but they will die again. The others to whom he is referring here will be resurrected. They will have resurrected bodies and live forever. There will be no death. So they will, after death, they will be exempt from death. So who is he speaking of? Any ideas? The notion of resurrection enters Judaism fairly late. So that should give some clue. Any ideas?
I mean, Lazarus is too late, right?
Yeah, and Lazarus is New Testament, and also it's in John's Gospel, which is certainly not written at the point that, I mean, it may be part of the oral tradition, but John's Gospel at least isn't written at the point that the author of Hebrews has written his letter. John's Gospel is written in about 100, I think, and the letter to the Hebrews is written in the mid 60s. So the better resurrection, given the lateness with which resurrection, the notion of resurrection, as opposed to simply being raised from the dead to die again, suggests that it comes uh, in the last couple of centuries before Christ, and that in turn suggests the Maccabean revolt. And so the most probably famous, I think famous example is the mother and her 7 sons, Second Maccabees, chapter 7. A good example is the prayer of the mother, or not prayer, the instruction of the mother in verse 27. She speaks to her son, "My son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years, and have reared you and brought you up to this point in your life, and have taken care of you. I beg you, my child, to look at the heaven and the earth and see everything that is in them, and recognize that God did not make them out of things that existed. Thus also mankind comes into being. Do not fear this butcher, but prove worthy of your brothers who have all died, who have all been martyred. But prove worthy of your brothers, accept death, so that in God's mercy I may get you back again with your brothers." So she urges her son to also be martyred because she's confident that, and she's after the death of her seventh son, she's next, and she knows that. So she believes she'll get them back because there will be a resurrection. And we're out of time. Let's plan on finishing the section next week.